welcome to the Carousel of Happiness Podcast. I'm your host, Allie Wagner. Before you ride the Carousel of Happiness, the operator will tell you the origin story of the carousel. The details of this story differ depending on the individual operator and their personal connection to the carousel. But in general, they'll explain that the 1910 carousel frame you're sitting on has been fully restored, and that every single animal on it was hand-carved by one man over the course of 26 years. Most operators will tell you that the Carousel of Happiness was created as an act of healing from trauma, and that it has a lasting impact on those who experience it. And I love each of the carousel operator stories, but today I'm going to share with you a favorite from carousel operator and poet Bert Rashbaum.
So this carousel you are about to get on is completely hand-carved by one man alone. It took him only 26 years to carve it, and the reason he carved it was to heal himself from something called the Vietnam War. So this is basically what one man's healing journey turned into. Everything you see that is wood, it's all his work. He paints them as well. Everything you see that is metal, including the motor and the switch and the center post and the great big gear, a few other things, that's from an old 1910 carousel that when he found it, this piece of wood over your head is from that, and that's the shape it was in. So he had to do all the wood. Anyway, these animals are very delicate. If you want to get on one, use only the metal steps and the poles to climb up. Don't use any ears or antlers or horns in any way. Those can break. And if you climb up on one, wear the seatbelt. And the music machine that's going to play is 111 years old. How many tickets you got there?
6.
Come on in, 6.
Operators are encouraged to personalize the story they share of the carousel to make it their own. Because we at the Carousel of Happiness are big believers that the impact of this place can be felt at the precise moment that you personally embody its story and allow it to shift or change something within you. And we believe this is possible for each and every person who learns of the carousel story, even if you never visit us in person, even if you never ride. The impact of the Carousel of Happiness is personal and unique to each and every being. We believe that if you allow the story of the carousel to meet you where you are often met with exactly what you need. That is the magic of this place. But wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. As I said before, my name is Allie Wagner. I am the host of this podcast and the outreach director for the Carousel of Happiness, located in the tiny mountain town of Nederland, Colorado. One of the reasons we are starting this podcast is that we understand that the Carousel of Happiness impacts the lives of those who experience it. We understand this because we see it every day. We see people walk into this building as one person and walk out fundamentally changed in some way. Doesn't matter if you ride, doesn't matter if you've been here 100 times before. There is something about this place that allows us, if we are willing and able, to shift and change within. We also understand this because we ourselves experience it. The people who work here, myself included, have all been impacted in some way by this antiquated machine spinning people round and round and round. We work here because it's an opportunity for us to continue to be molded and shifted by this place each and every day. I am many things, but above all else, I am a storyteller. Stories are how I understand the world. So stories are how I sift through the details and minutia of my daily life and make meaning out of it. I love making connections. I love finding depth and meaning in the everyday. And in a sense, this podcast is my version of the carousel operator story. It is my way of sharing how this place has impacted my life, as well as the lives of others. And it is my hope that through hearing the stories we share on this podcast with you, that you too will be fundamentally changed in some way. There's this special moment that happens when you ride the Carousel of Happiness. The operator has told you the story, they've taken your ticket, you've thoughtfully chosen the animal you'll ride, a very important decision, as we'll see. You've fastened your safety belt, you're ready, you're waiting. And this moment happens before the 1913 Wurlitzer band organ begins to play over 100 instruments on its own. This moment happens right before this elegantly simple, seemingly timeless piece of machinery begins to churn and move. This moment happens before the spinning, before the sounds, before the centrifugal force. In this moment of stillness, of pause, you can feel the anticipation start to build and swell. The energy in the room appears to have a life of its own. Riders and visitors alike can sense that something is about to happen. They can sense, beyond all logical explanations, that after a 3-minute ride, everything will be different somehow. And it's at this moment you'll hear the sound of a gong, a Japanese gong specifically, donated to us by local friend of the carousel, Stuart Horowitz. Stuart and his wife Kay spent many years in Japan raising their family. In the Buddhist tradition, when a gong is rung, it is thought to activate experiences of bliss and rejuvenation. The sound of a gong signifies that something special and magical is afoot. So while many traditional carousels begin with the ringing of a bell, we start our special little carousel by striking a gong. Welcome, dear listener, to the Carousel of Happiness podcast. Let us begin with today's story. I haven't worked at the Carousel of Happiness very long, only a couple of months, which is not a lot of time at most places, but it's particularly minuscule in this work environment. Many of my colleagues have worked here since we opened almost 15 years ago in 2010, as volunteers no less. Some of them even helped build the thing, in fact. And, as you'll hear today, carousel creator and carver Scott Harrison has been attached to the idea of this carousel since 1967. That's almost 58 years. So my measly couple of months means nothing. It's a drop in the bucket, as they say. But what's so striking to me is that even in this short amount of time, I have literally found myself changed completely. My relationship with my own story, my own past has changed. My relationship with my art has changed. My relationship to myself has changed, all because of a carousel. How? Why? What is going on here? Isn't this just a ride for little kids? I am a childless woman in her 40s. What is happening? And I'm not the only one. One of the first emails that I received when I started working here was an email from Nick in Denver. He shared this. In 2015, I quit drinking alcohol after many unhappy years, and I ended up in the ICU for about 4 days as a result of complications. After getting out of the hospital and spending a couple of tumultuous weeks recovering at home, I started driving the peak-to-peak highway as therapy. Often I'd end up driving through Ned, and one day I decided to stop at the Carousel of Happiness. I had seen it for years, but had never been in. I was completely alone. This was midday during the week, and I rode for maybe 30 minutes. Almost immediately after starting my ride, I felt a deep sense of calm, peace, and happiness come over me. I realized and I told myself everything is going to be okay. To this day, I carry a Carousel of Happiness penny in the coin pocket of my jeans to remind me of this fact. I am coming up on a decade free from alcohol. I've been married to my best friend for over 3 years now, and we have 2 beautiful tiny dogs. LOL. After getting things turned around, I knew I wanted to give back to people around me. So every year on my soberversary, I make a social media post inviting anyone to talk who thinks they might have a problem with alcohol. And every year I get more folks. I have personally helped about 12 people get sober. So many in my millennial generation have been affected by alcohol so severely. It is great to be able to use my insights and experiences to positively impact others. I was also directionless when I was drinking. When I was on that carousel, I knew I needed to find some meaning in what I do in life. So after I got sober, I got started down the path of sustainability. I worked for EcoCycle for 6 years, and I am now managing the waste and diversion systems for the Denver International Airport. And every day that I do that, I have my talisman from the Carousel of Happiness, my coin. I hope others get as much joy and comfort as I did and still do. Much love. Thank you for facilitating this profound, life-changing moment for me. Nick. And the truth is, we get emails like this almost every day at the carousel. And while the details are different, they all sort of have a similar pattern. People tend to be called to the Carousel of Happiness. People usually have a story about someone dragging them here or noticing out of the corner of their eye a flyer in the wall. You would never believe it. Typically, we hear about the long, meandering story that brought them to us. The list of signs and synchronicities that somehow guided them to our door. And then typically in these stories, there's some type of hurt. Maybe it's a loved one's passing, or as in this case, a personal struggle with addiction. While we are the Carousel of Happiness, we find that people often open up to us about their most tender moments here. And then in these stories of transformation, we hear about the transformation itself, about the movement from the dark to the light. There's something going on here. I can feel it. Nick felt it. Many of you who have already visited here have felt it. That's what we'll explore together on the podcast. What makes this place so special? What can we all learn from the story of the Carousel of Happiness and apply in our own lives? For today, we'll start with the seed of this idea, how the first of us, Scott Harrison, was called to the Carousel of Happiness. And as you might expect at this point, the seed for this beautiful idea, this lovely phenomenon, was planted in very dark soil. Our story begins on the other side of the world, 58 years ago, in Vietnam. Con Tien, to be exact. Known as the Hill of Angels in Vietnamese, Con Tien is just a little hill over 500 feet tall, located on the border between North and South Vietnam. And in 1967, it was the site of the northernmost U.S. Marine outpost during the Vietnam War. And while the name Hill of Angels might sound lovely, the reality of Con Tien in 1967 and 68 was anything but. During that time, the area was the site of intense fighting and shelling between American and North Vietnamese forces. Starting in February 1967 and continuing for the next 2 years, the fighting near Compiègne resulted in the deaths of 1,419 Americans, as well as left 9,265 Americans wounded. On the opposing side, the numbers are even more staggering. 7,500 North Vietnamese troops were killed during this period, and an unknown number were wounded. One of those 9,265 wounded Americans was Carousel of Happiness creator and carver Scott Harrison. Scott grew up in a small middle-class suburb outside Dallas. According to Scott, his upbringing was fairly typical of the time, a standard 50s experience. He had 2 brothers, 1 sister. His father was an engineer. Scott was a talented boxer in high school. 2 weeks before graduating from high school, Scott enlisted in the Marines. But the truth is, he was never supposed to be in combat in the first place. When he enlisted, he signed up to attend language school in Hawaii. His intention was to be part of an elite group of Marines who would win over the hearts and minds of civilians in Vietnamese villages with their language skills. His plan all along was to be a liaison, a bridge between 2 worlds. He intended to interpret for the Vietnamese during the conflict rather than shoot them. But after 2 months of language school, the government had different plans for Scott. He was shipped off to Compiègne and given a machine gun. He was a gunner now, not an interpreter. Scott shared some personal essays he wrote about his time in Vietnam with me. He wrote them about a decade ago as part of a veterans writing course. And I didn't know what to expect when I read them. In some ways, I figured I'd sort of already got the gist of his story, because I had learned about the Vietnam War in history books. My dad was in the Navy. My great-grandfather and grandfather were both Marines. I myself worked for the Navy as a civilian. I figured I knew how the story went. War was hard, but you dealt with it. Suck it up, Buttercup. But it is one thing to read about war data, about history, about policy, X number of casualties over X number of years. This type of engagement with history is valuable, but it is superficial. This way of engaging with history is a way to experience the event from the intellect, not from the heart. But we experience this human life with our senses, not just our minds. And when I sat down to read Scott's essays, I discovered it is a completely different experience to see the battlefield from a 17-year-old boy's eyes. Because that's who Scott was back then, a teenager, a baby. There was something about the details he remembered, the ones that haunted him, the sights and the smells that have lingered in his memory for over 50 years. And what struck me was how innocent they were in contrast to the world around him. As an example, one of Scott's first priorities upon arriving in Vietnam was fitting in. Typical teenager stuff, right? He arrived in Compiègne and he was naive and green, and he was aware that his shiny new fatigues were shiny. They were new compared to the dirty, salty grunts who had been there for a while. And in that moment, completely aware of what lay before him, he was more concerned about looking cool and fitting in with the other Marines than anything else. He compared it to the first day of high school, when you desperately try to wrinkle the creases out of your jeans before homeroom to make yourself look more hip, or at the very least, make it seem like your mom had not laid out your clothes neatly on the bed the night before. And when Scott arrives in Vietnam, preoccupied with his clean uniform, a split second later, a mortar round screamed in toward him, narrowly missing him and ripping into the body of a Marine nearby. In that moment, his new, shiny green fatigues were not his only problem. And that mortar round was the first of many. The fighting at Con Thien during this time was relentless. Mortars, rocket-propelled grenades, automatic weapon fire. It was constant and unrelenting. And that little hill of angels was highly exposed. There were no trees for cover, only shallow holes in the mud for protection. When there was a brief lull in the fighting, Scott and his fellow Marines found unique ways to cope with the seriousness of their reality. Some meditated, others smoked, some let off steam by joking around with others. Other Marines found solace by looking at photos of wives or girlfriends. These men, boys really, did anything that they could to take their mind off of where they were and what was happening around them. During this time, Scott's sister Chauncey knew he was having a rough time, so she sent him a care package. In addition to some food and special treats from home, there was a small music box that played a musical piece by Chopin called Tristesse, which ironically means sadness in French. During breaks in the fighting, Scott found that if he pressed the music box mechanism up to his ear, he could trigger himself to dissociate. There was something about that song that allowed his mind, encouraged his mind to leave the scene, even if it was just for a little bit. And when his mind wandered, it took him to a place he did not expect, a mountain meadow. In his mind's eye, on that battlefield, he could see this mountain meadow, green with lush grass, children playing and laughing. He could hear their voices. He could see picnicking families and a carousel. It's important to note that up until this point, Scott did not have a carousel connection at all. He did not have previously fond memories of riding one as a child. The image of a carousel seemingly came out of nowhere. It called to him. And these mountain daydreams served as a meditation for Scott, a survival mechanism. These daydreams allowed him to survive in a seemingly unsurvivable environment. In the early morning of January 26th, 1968, on Mike's Hill, 4 days before the Tet Offensive began, a firefight broke out. Northern Vietnamese forces attacked Marines from 3 sides with mortars, rocket-propelled grenades, and automatic weapons. In what would later be called a wild melee, U.S. Marines responded in kind, firing shots, later turning to hand grenades when they ran out of ammunition. After 2 days of relentless fighting, 31 medevac helicopters cycled through that battlefield, hovering and picking up the dead, hovering and picking up the wounded, hovering and picking up the dead. And in one of those medevac helicopters was Scott Harrison. During the battle, a North Vietnamese soldier, a stranger, as Scott likes to point out, likely a teenager himself, threw a grenade at Scott. The grenade missed him, but killed another Marine nearby. Except for one tiny piece of shrapnel, which ricocheted out of the other Marine and back towards Scott, wedging itself into the back of his left knee, severing his femoral artery. Scott woke up in the U.S. Navy hospital in Yokosuka, Japan, in a room with 80 other beds. The hospital was packed. Wounded men were spilling out of hospital bays into the hallways. Everywhere you looked were wounded service members. The morphine drips were steady. The moaning was constant. After a long, painful recovery, Scott was sent to Okinawa to finish healing and get ready to be shipped back to Vietnam. He had only 64 days left on his orders. And that number, 64, is very important, because at that time, government policy was to send wounded service members back to Vietnam as long as they had at least 60 days left on their orders. If you had 59 days left, you didn't go back. But if you had 60 or 61 days, you were shipped back to Vietnam. And in a twist of fate, what I like to call carousel magic, as soon as Scott's knee started to feel better, his teeth began to hurt. As it would turn out, his wisdom teeth did not intend to return to Vietnam with him. They would need to be removed before he went back. During the procedure, the military dentist shared his anti-war sentiments with Scott. So with 64 days left in his commitment to the U.S. government and orders to return to combat in his hand, Scott went to that dentist with shaking hands and asked him, "Please, issue a do not travel order for me for at least 5 days." The dentist agreed. Scott Harrison would never return to combat in Vietnam. But, as we will soon see, the battle was not over for Scott Harrison when he returned home. In learning more about Scott's story, we can see some common themes pop up. First is the fact that Scott, too, was initially called to the carousel. In those brief moments of stillness on that battlefield, Scott was somehow given the image of the carousel in a mountain meadow. This image did not come from his conscious mind. Remember, he did not have a memory of a carousel of any kind as a kid. This was not him recalling a familiar memory. This image seemingly came out of quote unquote nowhere. And I know this has happened to you. I know you've had those aha moments in the shower or when you're doing dishes or driving on a long road trip. I know that you've had that experience where your mind is just quiet enough that just know that the idea, the image, whatever has popped up in your mind was not conjured by you. And that is my invitation to you, dear listener, to explore this inner voice, to notice when it talks to you. What are you doing when it happens? How can you hear it best? I encourage you to be curious about what it has to say, even if it's crazy or it doesn't make sense. And I know this might sound very, very strange, but this is one of the things that I've learned since being involved with this carousel, and it's a common theme you're going to hear throughout the story of this creation. This work of art, this special place, started with Scott receiving a seemingly strange message or image or whatever you want to call it. And as we'll see in the episodes that come, he follows these images. He's curious about these images. He goes from breadcrumb to breadcrumb, taking it one step at a time. And as a result, wound up creating more beauty and more joy in his own life and the lives of others than he could have ever imagined. What about for you? What are those images that are calling to you? Are you listening? Are you following the call? I invite you to allow this story to be the impetus for you exploring how you personally receive signs, receive messages. Have you listened to those messages? How did it work out? If not, could you possibly consider trying something new? And I'd love to hear from you. If you are following along with the podcast and have something to share, I genuinely would love to hear it. You can DM us on social media. You can send me an email directly at outreach@carouselofhappiness.org. Check the show notes. Or maybe stop in and experience the carousel for yourself. Whatever you choose, I'd love to hear how you personally are interacting with the story of the Carousel of Happiness. What have you experienced? What have you noticed? On our next episode, we'll explore the dynamic between light and dark. How do they interact with one another? Are they two sides of the same coin? Can you have one without the other? What does the Carousel of Happiness teach us about our sadness? In the meantime, take care. Be well. And as we like to say at the Carousel of Happiness, don't delay joy. And we'll see you next time around.
Beginnings and endings are only pretendings. I'll see you next time around.